welcome to Vital Wisdom with me, Dr. Eli Camp. So today, I want to slip in a episode here based on some chatter that's been coming to me via email and text messages and in conversation about our kids and their mental, emotional well-being or not. And it's actually quite concerning. I think we should all be very concerned. I know throughout my practice years, I have seen my fair share of kids who suffer from a variety of things. ADHD, they used to call it ADD, but now it's ADHD. And the H stands for hyperactivity, so attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And not all kids have the hyperactivity portion of that. Some of them just have the, issues with staying focused and paying attention and being able to complete tasks and things like that. Anxiety is at an all-time high in kids, and even higher is depression. A few numbers here, not to lose you in statistics, but it should definitely be somewhat of a concern for all of us, whether we are parents or caregivers or practitioners. So ADD back in 2000 was about 6% of the population in the US as reported by NIH and CDC. About 6% of kids were diagnosed with ADHD. And we jump forward 24 years, and of course they measured it in between, and it showed a steady increase over time until we get to November of 2024, when the rates are put at about 12%. That's a doubling. That is a lot of kids, 12% of our young people here in our country. I don't know what it is worldwide, but since I live in America and I see mostly American kiddos, that's what I'm reporting on. That's a big jump. Anxiety back in 2017 was 7%, and in 2020 it had jumped to 10%. And there's some preliminary numbers coming in from 2023 and early 2024, where that's jumped up to 15%, which is not surprising given the pandemic and the incredible damage that was done by pulling children away from their friends and their peer groups and away from their what was normal for them. The one that may be the most concerning to me as a doctor is depression. In 2008, we had 8% rate of depression being diagnosed, and in 2020, that had almost tripled at 20%. And the numbers coming in now from 2023 and 2024, although they haven't prepared a final report yet, is upwards of 25%, and it's a quarter of all children in America. These numbers should strike alarm within each and every one of us. Why are our kids suffering with these mental, emotional disturbances? What's happening? And what can we do about it? Because with the increase in prevalence of these diagnoses and these conditions and these behaviors, there's also been an increase in medication prescribed and medications being used off-label and being approved for younger and younger ages. And just that in itself is really concerning, but these medications bring side effects and complex chemical interactions to each individual person. And we have no idea what the long-term outcomes of these are because they don't do those studies. We don't know how that's affecting them. So that's the state of affairs of things. And we need to ask ourselves what's happening. What is contributing to the rise of these diagnoses and of these conditions and behaviors and states of being for our children? And definitely one of the first things that comes to mind for me, and one of the things that I talk with every single family about, is food. And there are some studies out there that say, oh, changing the food doesn't really change the ADHD symptoms or the anxiety or the depression. And that singular change, I would have to agree, just that change alone does not necessarily drop things significantly, but it does a little bit, and it's one of a number of things that have to be looked at and addressed when we are asking ourselves, how do we reverse these trends? How do we do this in our own children? How do we do this for kids we teach or we counsel or we work with as healthcare providers? And what kids are eating today is significantly disturbing, at least to me, right? They are eating food that is packaged and processed and therefore dead. And they're full of preservatives and dyes and sugar. And while companies have to meet minimum levels of what we would consider toxins, or they're full of things that have been graded as generally recognized as safe, that's per food and per environmental factor. And we don't eat one food, we eat a whole bunch of foods, right? What goes in the grocery cart at the store starts to add up. All of these preservatives and dyes and lack of living raw food and enzymes and nutrients, food coming from nutrient poor soils, especially mineral poor soils, is creating deficiencies, creating a toxic load, a toxic burden on the body, where they have to process these out. And from a very young age, we feed kids this, I don't even consider it food, I consider it poison, and it alters the way their neurological system develops. We know that there are contributing factors like genetics and environment and other things, but food and food being fed over months and years can have an impact on how that child develops and what kind of diagnoses that leads to over time. So food is a big one. And food includes what they're drinking or not drinking, what they're eating or they're not eating, etc. The second contributing factor, and there are lots and lots of studies about this, is screen time. The way our children develop their neurological pathways and their processing is affected by how much time they spend interacting with screens, with games, and how much time they do not spend socializing and living in the real world. And the amount of screen time has steadily increased since 2013. And currently it's an average of 6 hours and 40 minutes per day. And we know that with increasing screen time comes decreased time spent interacting with people and living in the real world, as I just mentioned. And this has a tremendous effect on how our children's behavior is molded and shaped. Other contributing factors that people might not think about regularly are things like financial stress. So when a family is experiencing financial stress, This often requires parents to be absent more because they're working more and they're parenting and interacting with children less. And it falls to other people, whether it's older siblings or other family members or other types of caregivers, to spend time with our kids, raising them up in ways that we might not necessarily choose to raise them up. It also creates a frantic, hectic lifestyle in which it becomes very difficult for kids to focus on discrete tasks and their emotions and healthy ways to process through their emotions and to process through stress. They model what they see. And if they see concern and worry and anxiety and moving from one activity to the other very quickly, not enough time to pay attention to cooking meals and engaging in an activity or in activities that allow our kiddos to focus and to feel and to process, this is going to have a long-term effect on how they interact with themselves and with others in the world. So other contributing factors to this rise in these mental emotional sort of illnesses would include environmental toxins. Now, our world has fluctuated over the centuries in being more or less toxic, especially in cities. You know, when we were burning coal, leaded gasoline, there are times when, especially in the cities, things have been very toxic. But right now, we have other kinds of toxicities that we have to worry about that we've not ever really had to worry about before, like pharmaceuticals in our groundwater and in our municipal waters, electromagnetic radiation and cell tower. These, we have no idea how these affect developing nervous systems because they don't study that. They're not required to study that. And the agencies and organizations that are trying to do follow-up work and follow-up studies, now that this surrounds us everywhere, you know, they face a lot of challenges in teasing out, you know, what is contributing to what. The Wi-Fi and the routers that are present in homes. If you're in a city, there are towers and antenna everywhere. It's a little bit better when you get out from the city and you can get out into the countryside, not that there aren't towers around and a lot of this noise around and affecting developing children, but it's not as concentrated, right? There are lots of good things that you can do at night. Turn off your modems and turn off your Wi-Fi. Put your planes on airplane mode and turn off the Wi-Fi of the phones. There should be no phones in the bedroom. There really shouldn't be TVs, especially Wi-Fi TVs in bedrooms, things like that. So there are things that you can do. And you know, those little over-the-ear Bluetooth, kids should not be wearing these at all. No, none of us should be wearing them, but especially kids who have developing nervous systems. The educational techniques that are used for our children. So some humans do really well in a structured environment, sitting at a desk and learning, doing rote memorization, sitting in a quiet environment, listening to a teacher teach, and then having to regurgitate that back to show that they were paying attention and listening. Some kids do that well. Some kids pretend to do that well because if they don't fit into their social structure, right? But this is not natural learning for humans. Humans were built to move. We were built to think. We were built to talk, to interact, to work as a group, to work as a team, to touch, to feel, to smell, to problem solve. And our current learning classroom is completely backwards from how we do our best learning, especially our children. They have to sit there quietly and not talk and not problem solve and not work as teams, not explore through kinesthetic activities. It is very difficult to know, and I imagine there's a lot of people out there who are anthropologists or, behavioral therapists, and you know what I'm talking about. We are trying to force our children to conform to very unnatural ways of learning. And so when they can't sit still and they can't stay focused and they want to talk and chat and they act up and they act out and they have all this pent up energy, we want to give them a diagnosis of ADHD or anxiety, or better yet, when these things start to wear away at their spirit and their creativity and their natural inclination to be up and moving and making noise, and they have to squelch that to fit in, depression. And these educational techniques are creating a very disturbed mental, emotional generation, multiple generations of kiddos. And this extends, into kids hating school and not wanting to learn. And they carry these forwards into their adulthood. And unfortunately, we are all to blame for allowing education to be shaped in this way. And I know often that teachers are babysitters. I mean, we've known lots of teachers. Well, we've raised our first son, who's now 40, and we have our grandchildren who we adopted, and they're our kids, and they're in their late teens. And so we've interacted with lots and lots and lots of different kinds of teachers. And I haven't ever had a teacher disagree with me except to say, well, they have to learn how to function in society. And so if they can't learn how to sit quietly and focus and learn in a classroom, well, how are they going to do a job? And I just, my response to that is, what is so healthy about conforming in that way to begin with? Is this really how we become our highest functioning person? Is this how we reach our potential? Is to conform to an unnatural way of being, thinking, working, playing, and living? Something to think about, at least. Family conflicts between immediate family, extended family, conflict that is not resolved in a healthy way, and where it's demonstrated that conflict can happen and be resolved in a healthy and functional way, sets the stage for a lot of misperception. So children start to perceive the world around them as an unsafe place for them to express how they really feel or what they think, what they would like to have happen. They start to have a sense that they have no control over what happens around them. And this can definitely morph into what we think of as a diagnosis of ADHD or anxiety or depression. So conflict within the family or their extended family can absolutely be a contributing factor. And last but not least is parenting skills. So I think most parents are just trying to do their best to raise their children. But if you did not have a good example of how a child should be raised, and your parents didn't have a good example of how children should be raised, then where do you get your knowledge from to raise your children? Well, I know that parenting books, a lot of parenting books are sold, but just because you read a book doesn't mean that you necessarily know how or that you are applying those skills and those techniques. Parenting is a very specific job. We really have one job as a parent, in addition to keeping our kids safe and fed and clothed. Our job is to teach them what they need to know to become a balanced, self-sufficient, contributing, functional adult in society. And if you subscribe to one way of living life, and you maybe think of yourself as conformist and you want to teach your child to be a conformist, and you're having trouble with that, with these diagnoses that we're talking about, maybe your child is a non-conformer. Maybe this is not the best mold for them to try and fit themselves into, and giving them medication and drugs to force them into that mold might not be the best thing for them. It's just something to think about, right? There's no judgment here. I'm not saying I know the right or wrong way to do it, but I can definitely tell you that all of these things that I just went over, food, screen time, stress within the family, financial stress, parents being around less, environmental toxins, educational techniques and strategies that are used, family conflicts, and your own parenting skills as a parent, all of these are contributing factors. Now, what do we do when a child has one of these mental emotional diagnoses, right? Well, we go through all of those things. Let me work backwards. So we clean up the diet. And let me tell you how many times a parent has said to me, they just won't eat those foods. And so I have to give in and feed them something so they don't starve to death. And I say, and I'll say it here, it would be very difficult for anybody to convince me otherwise. When a child is hungry enough, they will eat what you've given them. So you are in charge of training your children to know what is healthy food and what is not healthy food. And if you don't know, there's certainly enough resources around for you to figure that out as an individual, and then in turn teach your child. Food is poison or it's medicine. And this is a job of a parent, is to teach our children, what do we need to feed our bodies so that they thrive and they heal and they do well, and what should we avoid because they're poisonous. Those substances are poisonous to our body. So diet is an area that all holistic practitioners are going to focus on. We're going to have clean up the environment, and that includes toxins and removing as much of the electromagnetic radiation that we can, perfumes, toxic things that are used to clean the home. We want to get clean and green, right? Learning alternative teaching methods, alternative learning methods. What is good for children? How do they learn best? And can you work with your educators to see if, instead of drugs, see if alternative learning and teaching methods can be utilized? Maybe you do some, maybe you consider homeschooling, where you have complete control of how your kids can run and jump and learn in a more natural way, something that comes more natural to humans. Reduce screen time. There's not a lot more to say about that. I mean, it's a big thing. Reduce it as much as you can. There are so many other ways that children can be occupied and entertain themselves. There are puzzles, and you can do things like having building blocks outside. You can color, you can draw, I mentioned four things. That there are hundreds upon hundreds of things that can take the place of screen time. Having them write a play and be the actors in a play and host their own radio show each week. Like there are a lot of things that you can do to replace screen time. Now, I know because I have friends who do this and family who does this, and have watched people from the time kids are very young use a screen as a babysitter, use a screen in the car so the car ride is, not so disruptive. But if you're willing to put the time in and be creative and participate in this, 10 years passes really fast. And then you get some of your own time back as a parent, and they don't spend as much time on the screen. My general rule of thumb is 30 minutes of screen time a day. And I know that doesn't sound like a lot, but it becomes very precious time to them. They use it wisely. They do their most favorite things. And if they are homeschooled and you need a screen to do some homeschooling, then of course you have to extend that some. But I also encourage people to look at other ways to learn than learning on the screen. Physical activity it's very important, especially for your ADHD crowd. They've got a lot of pent up energy. They have a lot of difficulty staying focused. And so there's a number of, and you can Google this, there's all kinds, there's lists of different types of physical activities for kids diagnosed with ADHD to engage in. And you can set up a schedule and they can engage in these physical activities on a regular basis, and it can really make a difference. It definitely affects their neurotransmitters and helps them start to reconnect the way they're thinking with the way their body's moving, which can be very beneficial. Herbal medicine, there's lots of great nervines and other types of herbs that can help settle things down, can help improve focus. Homeopathy, having a case taken and getting a remedy, an individualized remedy prescribed for your child, that can be incredibly beneficial and very helpful. Body work can be very helpful. So chiropractic, massage, fascia release, all different sorts of body work can help. Of course, you have to focus on the gut and make sure that you have a good microbiome in place. And there's also neurofeedback that can be very, very helpful. So I know I didn't give you anything specific that you can do, and that's because each kid and each family is different. But those are some of the very important areas that you should focus on when you are saying to yourself, how am I going to address this particular mental, emotional situation that I have with my kiddo, especially if you don't want to do drugs or you want to discontinue drugs. There are 4 books I'd recommend before I sign off from this episode. So I'm going to tell you them, and we'll pop the ISBN numbers into the comments or wherever it is we put these ISBN numbers. But the first one is Beating ADHD Naturally by Scott Johnson. ADHD Without Drugs, A Guide to the Natural Care of Children with ADHD by Dr. Sanford Newmark. And I've reviewed all of these. These are good. Healing ADD, the revised edition, the breakthrough program that allows you to see and heal the 7 types of ADD by Dr. Daniel Amen. And this last one really takes us outside the box, and it's ADHD Does Not Exist. The Truth About Attention Deficit and Hyperactivity Disorder by Dr. Richard Saul. So in that book in particular, he makes a good argument that ADHD is really part of a number of other types of disorders, and that it doesn't not exist on its own as its own diagnosis. It's an interesting book. The first three really give guidance and help in the things that you can do naturally at home. The great ideas there. And I think together, if we understand the contributing factors to ADHD, and we don't just look at this as, and not just ADHD, but also anxiety and depression in kids, if we look at this as a result of a number of these contributing factors, and we understand all the main areas, the key areas that have to be addressed to reverse these trends, I think together we can start to reverse this trend for the increase in mental and emotional instability that's happening in our young people right now. It takes a very special environment for a child to be able to grow and develop and thrive and feel confident and become strong and self-sufficient, and then ultimately be able to enter the adult ranks as contributing and productive members of society. And we have to do our part, all of us, to help make that happen. So thanks for joining me today on Vital Wisdom, and I'll talk to you next week.